Hello and welcome to GREENFLEET Talks. My name is Kate Armitage and I'm your host for our discussion today. I'm delighted to be joined by Dave Butters, General Manager of E.ON Drive. Hello, Dave.
Hi, Kate. Good afternoon.
And good afternoon. Yep, good to speak to you as well. Dave, and unsurprisingly, today we're discussing the transition to electric. Your E.ON is involved in this in two ways. So you're transitioning your own fleet to electric, as well as supporting the rollout of charging infrastructure for other businesses and fleets. Can you give us a quick overview?
Yeah, of course. That's absolutely right, Kate. So as a large business, obviously running our own fleet, we've got around 1,500 commercial vehicles. And we have got a stated aim to convert all of those to electric vehicles by 2025. We've started that journey, albeit it's not been an easy path to follow. We've currently got around about 80 fully electric vehicles in the fleet, so obviously a long way to go. But we're taking a lot of learnings from that process, and then, as you say, we also provide services to both domestic and business customers who are looking to electrify vehicles as well, and we provide charge points and associated, charging services, tariffs, and controls to our customers as well.
Great, thank you, Dave. And I'll come back to you on the vans that you have brought on board later on, if that's okay. I wanted to discuss with you the well-publicised challenges at the moment with vehicle supply issues, particularly the long waiting times, which has meant that a lot of fleets are having to run their existing vehicles for longer periods than they may have previously. What problems does that raise, and how do you see the issue resolving?
Yeah, so I guess there's practical challenges. First of all, for fleet managers and fleet drivers, and it's undoubtedly a difficult time for manufacturers as well as for customers at the moment. So sorry, there are, as I say, a number of practical challenges, having to manage older vehicles and the reliability and the efficiency that those vehicles can manage. So obviously practical considerations there, and also then the financial challenges that come with that around actually how do we manage that. In a lot of these vehicles were originally leased. What happens when the leases come to an end? Do we look to buy the vehicles outright? Do we continue the leases? What does that mean? All of that sort of thing. So it's some practical considerations, but also I tend to look at the wider issues that causes. First and foremost, obviously, we're trying to drive down emissions from particularly from transport, and the slower the rollout of EV is, the slower that happens. I guess on top of that, it also, the slower vehicles come into the supply chain in the first instance, the slower they then get turned into second-hand vehicles, and it starts to limit the rollout to the second-hand market, which for many users may well actually be the more affordable entry point for them. So it is a barrier to particularly those who are in certain sections of society that can't find it harder to access EVs immediately. It will be a bigger barrier for them as well.
Yeah, I agree, and it's not just EV actually. It's the whole second-hand market.
Absolutely.
Because actually a lot of fleets are getting rid of their petrol diesel to replace with electric. Okay, so we've seen over the last few years the range of batteries increasing, which in many instances means that range anxiety is not the perceived barrier that it used to be. So I think this kind of then puts the focus more on the charging infrastructure and the ease and convenience of charging. What do you see as the main problems with the public charging network?
Yeah, I think range anxiety hasn't completely gone away, and availability is still a challenge, particularly in some geographical areas, and there is a little bit of an imbalance, I think, in that. If you're lucky enough to live and work in London, you'll see a far better availability and
Yeah.
overall footprint of chargers than you will if you live in Norwich, for example. But that aside, I think there are challenges around actually those charge points actually physically being available and being usable. As we know, more EV drivers on the road. We're probably lucky actually in the UK in many regards that despite all the challenges of rollout of vehicles, we are still seeing an increasing number of EVs on the road. Actually, in other European countries, that has started to stall. But that brings with it, obviously, its challenges around availability of charging infrastructure, making sure that there are enough for the people that need to use it. Interestingly, for fleet drivers, one of the things that we've started to hear about is almost a negative perception of fleets because they are parked at public chargers, and potentially actually you're blocking a public charger from somebody else who might want to use it.
I've seen that.
So I think that's a particular challenge for fleets. And I think one of the things that we need to do to address that is continue to look at what are the right ways for fleets to charge. What are the right, how do we support home charging? How do we support depot charging? And other mechanisms for fleets to be able to charge. But there's always going to be a need for them to charge in public, and if we solve that availability problem, there's then I think the next thing on the list is, as I say, usability. So actually, have I got access to them? Do I need a particular app or a particular log on to an account or whatever it is? And then actually, can I be sure that the chargers are working? Reliability is often an issue, either because there's faults with the chargers, or actually they've not been connected to the network in the first place because the capacity isn't there, or for whatever reason. We're E.ON, relatively small public network, but we run 99% uptime on our chargers, and we're very proud of that. But I don't think that's the norm yet, and I think that's where we need to get to. And then I think on top of that, the cost of charging as well is a challenge, and is going to be a bigger challenge going forward. So actually, with the price cap changing in October, there's some analysis been done that I've seen that suggests even with home charging, the cost of running an EV is not going to be as significantly cheaper compared to an ICE vehicle as it has been. And when you're charging in public, obviously that becomes an even finer gap. So yeah, plenty of challenges there, unfortunately, as well.
Yeah, not so good. And I think your point about the reliability is a very good one. No one wants to arrive at a charge point and for it not to be working or not communicating with their vehicle. But I think for business drivers, for fleets, for van drivers, it's even more critical, because the time that has been allocated for them to charge is quite finite. So yeah, interesting times. But let's not get sucked into the cost of EV charging today, because that seems to be a very fluid landscape at the moment as well.
Yeah.
Dave, I think a lot of organisations now have introduced some EVs and have a net zero plan in place for their transition to zero emission vehicles. But I always like to just go back to, for the fleets that haven't yet bit the bullet, who have not started that transition, where would you recommend they begin?
So I think for me, and we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that it's not an easy task at all to consider electrification. It's an extremely large undertaking to do it, and do it properly, and to do it for a full fleet. That said, I think there's two starting points for me. One is the thinking and the planning. Really, what is it that you want to achieve and how, and then within that, looking at the quick wins. So we tend to look at when we've done the work ourselves, and then when we're talking to our customers as well, we look at 4 kind of specific use cases. We look at first of all the fleet, and actually what is the size of your fleet, what's the demographic of the drivers, what's the plan of the routes, and so on and so forth, and actually where are the best places for you to, when we're looking at charging infrastructure, where are the best places for you to charge? Is it at home? Is it at work? Is it in the public network? But then alongside that, we also look at what's your wider employee portfolio? What have you got in terms of other company car drivers, for example? What about your employees and how they drive? And then also looking at customers, and where is there an opportunity from your customers? And I think it's important to get the full spectrum of all of those use cases to really understand the full charging need that you have as a business and how best to roll that out. We as a business, we started with actually installing charge points at a lot of our offices, because that covered our employees, it covered our company car drivers, and also it could be used by our fleet drivers as well. Yep. We then looked at how do we encourage the take up of electric vehicles through our company car scheme. So we changed our company car scheme to a fully electric scheme. We also now offer leasing of EVs to employees as well through a salary sacrifice scheme, which then obviously helps take up of EVs in our employee population, increases the usage of the charge points that we've got at our sites, and makes them more efficient and financially viable as well. Then we looked at home charging and what we can do for charging at home for both fleet drivers and those other use cases as well. And when you put all of that together, you start to identify, here's some things that we can do quickly, and here's some things that will take a bit more time. But actually, even the things that take more time, there might be some planning that we can do now to make that easier in the future.
Great. And Dave, I'm very pleased as an expert panel, but you and our other panelists have all said basically the same thing, which is it starts with the planning. You have to understand what your needs are exactly as you've described, and then from there you can start to plan your transition, which is great.
Yes.
So I'm going to end just with a comment about vans in particular. The New Automotive recently published that electric vans accounted for 5% of new van registrations in July 2022, whereas diesel still accounted for 93% of new van registrations. So progress with vans is slower than we're seeing on the passenger vehicle side. Why do you think that is, and how can we overcome this?
Yes, I think the problems are not different, I don't think, to the car market. They're just exaggerated. So, the availability and the range of vehicles is still limited, and it's more limited in the van space than it is in the car space. And actually, I think van requirements are far more varied than they are in car requirements as well. So that's a challenge. And then obviously range anxiety and range requirements. Often van drivers will be driving longer distances than car drivers. Quite often, one of the things that we've heard quite a lot is about vans or particular use cases where those sorts of vehicles are used for harder to access areas, or areas they may well be out in areas for quite a period of time where there isn't charging infrastructure at all, and where it's not possible to install charging
in more remote areas.
Exactly, and it's far easier to carry a petrol can, for example, than it is to carry a spare battery or that sort of thing. So I think, as I say, I don't think it's different problems. I think it's just exaggeration of the same problems. In terms of what can be done about it, I think there's a little bit on the side of the drivers and the fleet managers to really challenge themselves around, how can we do things differently? Clearly, you don't want to impact productivity, and that's a real big consideration for fleets and business drivers. But how can you do things differently that allow you to not necessarily convert your whole fleet, but some of your fleet, and take those smaller steps? But then there's also a big part for the manufacturers to play, I think, to put a real focus on vans. The government are currently consulting on the zero emission vehicle mandate, and looking at how they can mandate production volumes or percentages of vehicle sales on EV. And we're lobbying very hard that vans should be part of that and should be as much as possible comparable to cars in the way that the mandate is rolled out and managed, because I think it's very important that the manufacturers play a role in providing that choice and the options for fleet drivers to make it as easy as possible for them to adopt.
Yeah, we definitely need more choice, and ideally the cost to come down, as well. Well, Dave, that's about all we've got time for. It has been a pleasure talking to you again. Thank you to E.ON for joining Greenfleet Talks, and thank you for watching. Please tune in again to GF365 soon.